After I rejoined the group, we were in some bubbly air, and it felt like there should be a climb somewhere close by. And you can see we're searching all over the place. It's important that even when there's no obvious climbs, to keep the center of the group together. It's a vulnerable period where you can split the group if you have folks searching in different directions, kind of far from each other, right? So it's important to still keep the core of the group spatially in one spot and then send search parties out only like in one direction at a time. You want to have people sampling the air in a way that the others can definitely reach them if they find the better air. You don't want to have multiple people off doing their own little missions and then have, if somebody finds a whole bunch of sink when the other person finds great air, and then everybody moves over to the good air, and then this person can get isolated in the sink. They don't have a home base to return to, and then the group gets split up. After searching for a while, we never did find a good climb in this area. JK pushed upwind a little bit. I followed him out, and we didn't find a good climb, but it was pretty buoyant, so we just kept going. And the ridgeline was just kicking off enough kind of anabatic ooze that we were able to keep a good glide. So at this point in the flight, we're thinking about our turnaround point. The dream flight would have been go all the way to Wanaka, maybe even cross the lake and then come back. But remember, we had this shade bearing down on us from the northwest. So the cursor, like over here, there's this wall of shade, and it's not anything that was dangerous looking. It wasn't like built up development or rain or wind or anything. It was just, it looked like it was going to shut down the climbs. So we want to make the most of the day. We don't want to turn around too early, but we also want to make sure that we can, have some lift on the way home. So JK was actually planning to just continue all the way to Wanaka and not do the return trip to Queenstown. He had his lady ready to pick him up in Wanaka. So it was just going to be the four of us making our way back to Queenstown. So the rough plan was to run this ridge all the way to the end where you see the snow stop here, and then cross the valley to what we were quite certain was going to be the land of milk and honey, because it's facing west, this range over here, and the west wind was coming over the range that we're on, and we figured it'd just be a windward face to have all these spines baking in the sun, like no stress whatsoever. A little foreshadowing. It didn't turn out that way. So there's one more error for me to make, though. You'll see as we come running down this spine. So I'm looking over to across the valley, deciding which peak we're going to head towards when we cross, and I basically got the blinders on. I was so certain it was going to be working so well over there. I wasn't particularly concerned about topping out and having I didn't consider this like a crux of the flight. So I missed the fact that Minoru found a nice climb that the others took a nibble at that I didn't even know about. I didn't notice that there was a climb happening behind me. And it can be helpful in these times to just get on the radio if you have people out front and say, hey, climb behind you. And had I heard that, I probably would have immediately turned around and joined everybody, but I didn't. So I kept going, and everybody had to break off their climb and stay with me, which put us at a little bit of a disadvantage from the transition standpoint. Back on board with Minoru. You'll see when he looks to the northwest, you'll see the shade line encroaching upon us. It's already on the other side of the valley there. So look how much altitude he has. He's about 300 meters higher than us by wisely taking a climb prior to that transition, and that put him in a better air mass, so he didn't hit the sink that we got on the downwind valley crossing. So we'll see what he does with this extra altitude a little bit later. When you're making a transition like this is a vulnerable point where the group could split if you don't all make contact with the terrain in the same area. If one pilot is obviously in front and they're heading towards a spine, it's easy just to follow them. But sometimes, if you're spread out side by side and there's different options, it's easy for your lines to start diverging without really noticing it. And then all of a sudden you have two pilots committed to two different spines where one person cannot easily reach the other unless you find a climb. And that's a really vulnerable period where you can get split up. If there's a bunch of different possibilities that all look okay, then just the rule is you follow the low person, right? The low person has the least amount of reach and the least amount of options. And so the higher pilots
need to stay with that low pilot, because the low pilot cannot come over to you if you're far away, right? The high people can come to the low person, but not vice versa.
We're flying downwind on this valley crossing, heading to the east towards Knuckle Peak here, which is this mountain. By all accounts, it should have been working great. It is baking in the sun. Although that shade line was behind us, it hadn't yet reached this area, so it's nice and sunny. It's a windward face, and it should have just been working great. But instead, as we get closer to terrain, our ground speed starts to slow down, start hitting scrappy turbulence, and wouldn't you know it, we were in a mild lee side. The hubris of making assumptions. So you can see I was lower coming in, but in front. You can see the track of my thermal as it starts to get a little bit higher. It's actually being blown away from the terrain out back towards the middle of the valley. I don't know exactly why we were in the lee here, but if you zoom out a bit, so remember the Medio wind is west, so it's coming from our backs towards the top of the picture here. But this mountain, this ridge that we're heading at is not continuous at this point. Look at all these gaps, right? So there's a gap here, gap there. There's a whole different valley system here with gaps. So I believe what was happening though, even though the Medio was still from the west, we were feeling this kind of east to west valley wind being pushed from this system over here near Cadrona, being sucked towards the heat center, the local heat center, which was in the tall terrain further to our west. And it made it pretty tricky, as lee sides are, right? You don't have as much margin, it's turbulent, you don't want to be close to terrain and catch a collapse. And the climbs are not consolidated, right? All the hot air is not being drawn up these spines underneath us. It's just kicking off from the terrain immediately below us and even blowing off the terrain upwind of us. We had our ace in the hole, Minoru. Look how high he is over here. And he was able to skip this whole icky lee side area and head straight to the peak and give us a report on what was happening. He was so high I didn't even recognize him at first. I said, "Hey guys, let's go check out that white glider." And Marcel told me, "Hey man, that's Minoru." But look at his climb, boom. It's also blowing to the east. So unfortunately, there's no relief to be had on this high terrain. And Minoru reported back to us, "Yeah, guys, it's working. There's climbing air, but it's tricky, it's hard, it's turbulent." So with that in mind, we set to hard work of getting enough altitude to make the next crossing, which is towards Mount Soho and Rose's Saddle. Are they going to make it over the saddle? Find out in Team Flying Part 4, Crux Decisions.